The fog hung low and thick over the town of Bellwether Bay, a pale curtain that softened the edges of things. It rolled in from the Atlantic without hurry, cloaking the streets in a hush that felt too deliberate to be weather. Samuel Alder, 79, walked the familiar path that circled the harbour, hands tucked deep into the wool pockets of his overcoat, breath rising in slow, clouded puffs. Bellwether had once been a living postcard. Cobblestone streets, wooden boats tethered to creaking docks, a bakery that sold lemon shortbread with real lemon zest, not that artificial kind. Now the bakery was gone. So was the bookstore. The antique shop shuttered last spring, its windows still marked with sun-faded signs. Everything must go, and it had. Even the gulls seemed quieter these days, as if the town's silence was contagious. Samuel passed the bench where he used to sit with Clara. Same worn wood, same view of the lighthouse blinking in the distance. He didn't stop, not anymore. The cane in his left hand tapped rhythmically against the stones, a companion in conversation if not in reply. His right hand rested near his chest, where the edges of a worn scarf peeked from beneath his coat. It had been Clara's once, ivory wool, soft with age, still faintly smelling of lavender and cedar if he pressed it close enough. He never washed it, not properly. It felt like betrayal. As he turned down Mariner's Row, something made him slow. There, wedged between an abandoned millinery and a crumbling shoe repair shop, stood a building that hadn't been there yesterday, or last week, or ever. It looked old, but not in the way of rotten ruin, in the way of memory, weathered brick walls crawling with ivy. An arched wooden door painted a muted blue, chipped just enough to look earned. Above it, in gold-flaked lettering, were the words, Bellwether Post Office Est. 1891. Samuel narrowed his eyes. That wasn't possible. The Bellwether Post Office had been torn down in the early 90s, replaced by a soulless strip mall where even the ice cream parlour had shut down. He stepped closer. The windows were frosted, obscured by lace curtains that fluttered slightly, though there was no wind. The door had a brass handle worn smooth with time and use, and a little bell hung above it, the kind that jingled when you walked in, if it worked. Samuel looked up and down the street, empty, quiet. The fog seemed to thicken behind him, sealing him in. He reached for the handle. The bell rang, sweet and small, as the door creaked open. The warmth inside hit him like memory. Not just heat, but the smell of aged paper, ink, beeswax polish, and something faintly floral. The interior glowed with amber light, cast from 2 hanging lamps and a glass skylight above. Dust motes floated like snow in a shaft of morning light. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes and envelopes tied in twine. A counter, smooth from decades of resting arms, stretched across the room's centre. Behind it stood a woman in a dark green blouse and a burgundy cardigan, her grey hair wound into a low bun. She looked up and smiled gently as though she'd been expecting him. "Mr. Alder," she said. Samuel froze. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" "In a way," she said, and bent slightly behind the counter. When she straightened, she was holding an envelope, cream-coloured, hand-addressed, ink a soft, faded black. He took it slowly, his fingers trembling before they even touched the paper. It was Clara's handwriting, delicate, precise, the loop in the S of his name unmistakable. Samuel Alder Seacliff Cottages, Bellwether Bay. He stared at it. His mouth opened, then closed. The postmark read, March 3rd, 1987. He had buried Clara in 2006. "This must be some mistake," he said, though his voice cracked halfway through. "This can't be." The woman only smiled. "You can read it here if you'd like. Some prefer that." The room felt heavier now. Time folded in on itself, compressing like old paper between books. Samuel looked at the envelope again, and he broke the seal. The envelope opened with a sigh. Inside, one sheet of paper, no more, no less, folded once, carefully, not yellowed, not brittle, but aged in that delicate way paper ages when it has meaning. The ink hadn't faded, though his eyes misted so quickly he had to blink several times before the words stopped swimming. He read it. "My dearest Sam, if you're reading this, I found a way to reach you. That's all I ever hoped for. One more word, one more moment. There are things I never said. I was afraid to, afraid I would burden you. But now, in this strange place beyond the hours we counted, I only feel the weight of what I left unsaid. You were always more than you believed. You carried me when I was too proud to ask. You forgave me before I asked to be forgiven. I saw the sadness in you sometimes, like you were already practicing how to live without me. But Sam, you don't have to live without me, not completely. If this letter found you, then so will the rest. With all my love, Clara, still yours." He didn't realize he was crying until the tear dropped onto the paper just beside her name. He touched it, as if he could protect the ink from the salt, as if part of him still didn't believe it was real. He read the letter again, and again, each time slower, as if memorizing it could resurrect her voice in his ears. When he looked up, the woman behind the counter hadn't moved. She stood there with the patience of someone who understood grief not in theory, but in practice. She gave no comfort, but also asked for none. It was the rarest kind of mercy, presence without intrusion. Samuel cleared his throat. "How is this possible?" The woman's smile didn't waver. "Not everything is meant to be understood." "That's not an answer." "No," she said, "it isn't." He folded the letter as carefully as he could and slid it back into the envelope, though the seal could never be restored. He ran his fingers across the return address. There was none, and then over the edges of the paper, afraid to let go of the last thing his wife had touched, even if it was impossible. "Are there more?" he asked. "There will be," she said. "One each time you return." Samuel looked around. The post office was impossibly quiet. There were no clocks, no modern signs, no fluorescent lights humming in the background. Just the warmth of wood, the smell of old paper, and the strange feeling that he had stepped into a space outside of ordinary time. "Why me?" he asked. "Why now?" The woman tilted her head. "You came when you were ready. That's all it takes." He wanted to ask 1,000 more questions, but they clung to the back of his throat, too heavy to speak. Instead, he turned toward the door. Outside, the fog had thinned, and he could see the path more clearly. The ivy around the post office's door had shifted, or maybe it hadn't, now curling softly around the name above as though guarding it. Samuel stepped out, the letter clutched in his hand, and when he turned back just once to see the strange little building again, it was gone. Just 2 abandoned storefronts, just an empty space between shadows. But the letter was real, and tomorrow he would walk the same path and see if the door would open again, The wind off the harbour was sharper the next morning, pushing against Samuel's coat as if urging him to turn back, to stay home, to forget. But he didn't. He followed the same cobblestone path, past the same grey bench, past the faded mural of ships that no one had repainted since the town's bicentennial. Mariner's Row emerged from the mist like a stage set, quiet and blank, holding its breath. The space between the old hat shop and the shuttered cobbler's store was just a wall again, brick and mortar. Ivy twisted around a rusted drain pipe, nothing more. Samuel stood there for a long time, just staring. Maybe yesterday had been a hallucination, a dream. But then he noticed something odd. At the base of the wall, near the curb, a brass key lay nestled in a curl of ivy, half buried, as if someone had dropped it in haste. He knelt slowly, knees creaking in protest, and picked it up. It was old, polished smooth by years of use, no markings, no tag. And when he stood, the door was there, just like that. The same faded blue paint, the same flaking gold lettering, Bellwether Post Office Est, 1891. His heart thudded hard against his ribs. This time the bell over the door rang before he touched it, like the place had felt him coming. Inside, everything was just as he remembered. The shelves, the warmth, the low golden light that pooled like sunrise on the floorboards, the scent of lavender and paper. The woman was there, again. This time arranging envelopes in a wooden cubbyhole behind the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Alder," she said without looking up. "You knew I'd come." "You have another letter," she said simply. She reached under the counter and handed it over. This envelope was a different colour, pale blue, and the handwriting on the front wasn't Clara's. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. He recognised it immediately. Charlie Alder, his brother, gone since 1974. Sam's hands shook as he opened the envelope, tearing through time itself. "Sammy! Hell! I don't know where to start. You were only 28 the last time I saw you. You were wearing that stupid canvas coat and pretending like you had it all figured out. You didn't. But neither did I. I was reckless. You always said it, and you were right. But I never got to tell you that you were also my anchor. You were the one I looked to when I got scared. And yeah, I got scared more than I let on. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, for how I left. I didn't mean to die. I meant to come back. You kept the family together longer than any of us realized. Even after Dad passed, even after the war. You did good, Sam. Better than good. Wherever you are now, just know I'm with you." Your big brother, Charlie Samuel, read the letter sitting in the wooden chair by the counter. When he finished, he sat for a long time, the paper limp in his lap, his eyes glassy but dry. Something eased inside his chest, a pressure he hadn't known was there for decades. Charlie, after all these years. He looked up. The woman behind the counter was dusting a wooden clock that had no hands. "How do these letters get here?" he asked quietly. "How are they written?" She glanced at him, then at the clock, then back to the shelf. "You're asking the wrong questions. Then what's the right one?" She smiled faintly. "What will you do with what they give you?" He didn't know how to answer that, but when he walked home through the thinning fog, he carried 2 envelopes close to his chest, and that night he wrote in a notebook he hadn't touched in years. He wrote long into the dark, not to someone else, but to himself. The next few mornings unfolded with the quiet reverence of ritual. Samuel would rise before the sun broke the horizon, boil a kettle for tea, and fold Clara's letter twice more than it needed to be folded, as if each crease pressed it deeper into permanence. He tucked Charlie's into a leather-bound book he hadn't opened since the 80s, between pages about sea shanties and coastal tide lore. That morning he stopped at the mirror by the coat rack, catching his reflection the way one catches a glimpse of an old friend they're unsure they still resemble. His face was lined, weathered, like the harbour stones that marked the edge of town. But his eyes, there was something new in them, or maybe something very, very old that had come back to the surface. He slipped on his coat and stepped into the cold. Fog again. Of course. He walked slower this time, not out of hesitation, but something like reverence. The post office, or whatever it was, never showed itself until he let go of his knee to see it. That was the trick, wasn't it? You couldn't chase it. You had to receive it. And sure enough, just past the crooked alley between the cobblers and the old butchers, it blinked into view like a memory being remembered. Bellwether Post Office, right where it had never been. The same bell, the same warmth, the same woman. But this time, there was someone else inside. A man stood near the brass post boxes, hat in hand, shoulders hunched as though burdened by more than the weight of winter. He didn't look up as Samuel entered. The woman gave a subtle nod, acknowledging them both. She motioned Samuel to the counter. "Third one's ready," she said. Samuel's fingers trembled slightly as he took the envelope. It was cream-coloured this time. The script on the front was delicate, slanted, unmistakably feminine. He knew it the moment he saw it. Margaret Ellis. A name that hadn't crossed his lips in over 50 years. His first love. He remembered her the way some people remember summer storms. Brief, wild, unforgettable. They had been 17, and foolish, and full of the kind of love that knew no timeline, just urgency. She had moved away before the last leaves fell that year, and they'd never spoken again. Not really. A postcard once, he thought, but that was it. He opened the letter carefully, feeling as though he was holding a pressed flower, something too fragile for the world outside. Dear Sam, you were the boy who read me poetry in the back of the library stacks, the one who made me believe there was something holy in laughter. I left because my parents made me, but I stayed gone because I was afraid you'd already moved on. I never married. I came close once, a kind man with kind eyes, but he wasn't you. I followed your life from afar longer than you might think. I saw your wedding announcement. I cried, but not out of jealousy. You looked happy. She looked gentle. And now I'm here, somehow writing to a moment that exists outside of time. Isn't that a wonder? Just know you were loved. Not just once. Not just for a season. Always. Margaret Samuel read it with both hands gripping the edges of the page as though it might float away if he didn't tether it down. When he finished, he exhaled so deeply he felt lightheaded. A quiet cough drew his attention. The man by the post-boxes had turned to leave but paused at the door. For just a moment their eyes met. There was something there. Not recognition, not exactly, but a kind of shared weight, like two travellers passing each other in a place most people never find. Then the man left, the bell above the door giving one soft chime in his wake. Samuel looked back at the woman. "How many people come here?" "Enough," she said. No more than need to, he nodded. Then, will they ever stop? The letters? She gave him the faintest smile. Only when you've read them all. That night, back at home, he didn't write. He sat by the fire and thought about the strange arithmetic of time, how some moments stretch for decades, while others disappear before you can name them. 3 letters, 3 voices from the past, and something told him he hadn't even scratched the surface. It was 3 days before Samuel returned. Not because he didn't want to, quite the opposite. But there was a part of him that feared what might come next. The letters had started to occupy his dreams. He'd wake in the middle of the night hearing Clara's voice. Not the ghostly echo of grief, but something clearer, fresher, like she had just walked into the room. Margaret's letter specially lingered in his mind. He had read it a dozen times, tracing the familiar loops in her handwriting, remembering the way she laughed with her whole body, shoulders and all, when he used to recite terrible romantic poetry under the elm trees behind the old church. There had been a moment when he nearly booked a flight to Chicago, where he'd last heard she'd lived, but the logic quickly unravelled. She would be gone now. That was the whole point. So he waited, and when the pull finally grew too strong to ignore, he walked the familiar path again, past the salt-worn houses and the cold stone pier, through the misted alley where sea air met brick dust, and again, as if summoned by thought alone, the Bellwether post office appeared. Today it smelled faintly of cinnamon and cedar. The woman was behind the counter, as always. She looked up with those calm, ageless eyes, then nodded toward a small wooden tray beside the scale. "There's something different today," she said. In the tray sat not an envelope but a small square parcel, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a bit of twine. Samuel picked it up carefully. It was heavier than it looked. No name on the outside. He glanced up at her. No letter? "Sometimes what's sent isn't written," she said softly. He untied the twine with the care of a man defusing a bomb. Under the wrapping was a jewellery box, scuffed, old, lined with red velvet. Inside was a pocket watch. His breath hitched. He hadn't seen this watch in decades. It belonged to his father. Lost, or so he thought, during a move in the early 90s after Clara had her second fall. He thought it had been stolen. But here it was, the engraving on the inside still sharp. "For every hour we shared, E.A., E.A., Edward Alder, his father." Samuel swallowed the lump rising in his throat. The watch was wound. It ticked. The sound filled the small space like a heartbeat. He didn't ask how it had returned to him. He didn't ask who had sent it. Some questions, he was learning, only tarnished the wonder with their asking. Instead, he stood there, listening to the slow, steady rhythm. The woman behind the counter was watching him quietly. "Would you like to read the list?" she asked. He blinked. "List?" She slid a small ledger across the counter. The cover was cracked leather. Samuel opened it to the first page. It was filled with names, each one written in a delicate calligraphic hand. Some he recognized instantly. His old boss at the cannery, a childhood neighbour, a woman who used to bring apples to his classroom when he was 9. Others stirred faint memories, and some he didn't know at all. At the bottom of the page, written in bold ink, was his own name, Samuel Alder. He looked up, unsettled. "What is this?" "It's the list of correspondence," she said. "The ones who have messages for you, or objects, or pieces of memory. Each will arrive when it's time." Samuel stared at the ledger. There were dozens of names, possibly more. He flipped the page, it continued, and another. The list went on. "But they're gone," he whispered. "Some," she agreed. "Not all." He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "So this is a gift," he said slowly. "A kind of reckoning?" She tilted her head slightly. "It's a conversation. One that never got finished." He took the ledger gently and held it to his chest for a moment before placing it back on the counter. The watch in his hand still ticked, steady and sure. "What happens when I reach the end of the list?" he asked. Her smile deepened, kind, sad, knowing. "No one ever really reaches the end," she said. "But if you get close, you'll know what to do." That night, Samuel wound the pocket watch and placed it on the table beside his bed. Its ticking lulled him to sleep, carrying him through dreams shaped like letters unopened, memories unfinished, and rooms once forgotten. And in every dream, a bell rang softly in the distance. Samuel woke to the sound of gulls screaming over the harbour and the gentle clink of the pocket watch on his nightstand. The room was still shadowed by early dawn, the thin coastal light leaking through salt-frosted windows. He sat up slowly, brushing a hand through his thinning hair, and reached for the watch. It ticked on. Not just a sound, but a rhythm, as if marking not just time, but something deeper, a thread pulling him forward. Today the fog was lighter. The sun burned faintly behind it, casting the town in pale gold. Samuel wrapped himself in a heavy coat and left the house without breakfast, his feet already knowing where they were going. He walked past the leaning bookstore where the window still displayed a sign reading "Back in 5 minutes," though no one had been back in years. Past the pier where the fishing boats used to return full and loud. Now only a couple remained, swaying gently in silence. The alley emerged before him like a page turned in a familiar book. There it was, Bellwether Post Office, ivy clinging higher than before. The bell gave its single, soft chime. Today there were 3 people inside. 2 were seated on the wooden bench near the front. The third was a young woman at the post boxes, staring down at a letter with trembling hands. None of them spoke. Samuel nodded respectfully as he passed them, feeling like a member of some secret congregation. At the counter, the woman, always the same, had already laid a new envelope out before he arrived. No words exchanged, just the silent understanding of a ritual that had become sacred. He picked it up. The envelope was blue this time, lighter, more delicate. His name was written in an almost childlike scrawl. Sammy. His heart skipped. Only one person ever called him that with such affection. He opened it carefully, his hands now practiced in reverence. "Dear Sammy, I told your mama I'd write, even if it took me years to figure out how. I know I wasn't the kind of father you needed, not when it mattered most. I was afraid of how much you were like me. Stubborn, quiet, always carrying more than you let anyone see. I thought being hard would teach you to be strong. But I see now. You were already strong. You just needed someone to sit with you in the silence. I watched you grow from the other side of life, whatever that means here. I saw you raise your boys. I saw how you cared for Clara. You were the man I hoped you'd be. Even if I didn't tell you when I had the chance, I'm sorry I never wrote you when I should have. Love always, Dad." Samuel stood frozen, the paper trembling in his hand. His father, Edward, hadn't been cruel, not exactly. But he had been distant, a presence defined more by absence than attention. Samuel had spent years wondering what he could have done to close the space between them. Now the words were here, too late, and yet, maybe not. He didn't cry, not here. But his breath came shallow, and he pressed the letter gently to his chest before folding it and slipping it into the inside pocket of his coat. Behind him, the girl by the postboxes sniffled. The man on the bench bowed his head, a letter clutched like a prayer. Samuel turned back to the woman. "Can I write one?" he asked, surprising even himself. Her expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted like the hush before snowfall. "There's a desk in the back," she said. "You'll find paper, ink, take your time." He followed her gaze. A small door behind the counter, once overlooked, now slightly ajar. Through it, a narrow room with warm light spilling onto a wooden writing desk. The kind no one used anymore, with drawers, brass handles, and a green glass lamp like the ones in libraries. He stepped inside and closed the door. The room smelled of old cedar and faint lavender. A fountain pen rested on a blotter. Sheets of thick stationery waited patiently. He sat, took a breath, and began to write. "Clara, I miss you more than air some days. I don't know if this letter will reach you the way yours did me, but I needed to try. You gave me everything. Laughter, stillness, even the space to fall apart when I needed it. I never told you how scared I was during your last months. How much I wished I could trade places with you. I see you in the house, in the way the kettle whistles, in the corner of the garden where the mint still grows wild. You haunt me, but in the softest ways. I love you, still, always. Sam." He signed his name, folded the letter, sealed it. When he returned to the front room, the others were gone. The place was empty save for the woman at the counter. She took the letter without a word, but her eyes held something deeper now. An understanding, a peace, maybe even pride. Samuel nodded. He stepped outside, back into the morning light, the fog beginning to burn off. And for the first time in a very long while, he didn't feel alone. Samuel didn't go home right away. Instead, he walked along the shoreline path where the ocean met the edge of the town. The tide was out, exposing smooth stones and bits of driftwood like bones laid bare. The gulls wheeled above, quieter than usual, or maybe just respectful. Each letter he received filled something in him he hadn't known was still hollow. But writing one, that had changed everything. He felt lighter, like he'd finally exhaled after years of holding his breath. The rest of the day passed slowly. He made himself a sandwich he barely touched. He turned on the radio only to switch it off again. Every sound inside the house echoed. Clara's voice no longer filled the corners, and yet somehow it still lived in them. That night, sleep came in waves. When he dreamed, it was of the post office, doors opening that hadn't been there before, voices from long ago whispering just beyond the reach of waking. The next morning, a storm rolled in, the kind that turned the ocean slate grey and made the windows of his cottage tremble. He wasn't planning on walking into town, not in that rain. But by noon, the pull was too strong. Umbrella in hand, boots on, he stepped out into the rain like a man who had no choice but to follow where the tide led. The post office was there, waiting, always waiting. This time the bell didn't chime. It let out a low, almost hollow gong, like a clock tower heard through fog. There were no others today. No man on the bench, no girl by the boxes. Only the woman behind this counter, and a single envelope sitting beneath her hands. Samuel approached slowly. The envelope was green, pale sage, the kind Clara had used for invitations once. But this time the handwriting wasn't hers. He recognized it immediately. Thin, precise, a little shaky. James T. Morland, his best friend from the war. Samuel's hand trembled as he lifted the letter. James had died in 1971. A training exercise gone wrong. There hadn't been a funeral. Just a folded flag and a letter from a man in uniform who hadn't known either of them. He opened the envelope carefully, expecting nothing and everything all at once. "Sam, you old bastard. You outlived me like I said you would. Bet you're still walking like your boots are made of bricks and your heart's made of glass. I'm sorry I never got to say goodbye. We both knew the risks, but I didn't think it'd be me who went first. You always had the slower reflexes, remember? I've been watching in whatever way a guy like me can watch. You carried a lot after I was gone. Too much. I never blamed you for that day. You made the right call. I want you to finally believe that. You don't owe ghosts anything, Sam. Not even me. Go live what's left of your story. And for the love of God, stop eating plain toast." Jim Samuel blinked hard. A laugh broke from his throat, wet and hoarse and unsteady. Jim, always managing to mock and move him in the same breath. He held the letter to his chest, then folded it neatly and slipped it into the coat pocket where Clara's had gone. That pocket was growing heavier with ghosts, and somehow that was comforting. He looked at the woman behind the counter. "How long will the letters keep coming?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached beneath the desk and pulled out a small leather-bound book. It looked like an old appointment ledger, but the pages were covered in names, dates, places. She turned it toward him. He saw his name, and beneath it, letters remaining too. He stared, then looked up. "That's it?" She nodded gently. "Every story has an end, Mr. Emery." His mouth felt dry. "And after that?" She didn't say, just looked at him with the same calm certainty she always had, as if the question didn't need answering, or the answer was one he'd have to discover for himself. He nodded, silent, tucked the letter closer, and turned to go. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened like glass, reflecting the dull silver of the sky. Samuel stood in the doorway a long time, breathing in the sharp, wet air. He didn't know who the next two letters would be from, but he knew he'd be back, because the past, when it called, deserved to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, the final goodbye wasn't something to be feared. Maybe it was a door, and maybe it opened both ways. The days between visits stretched longer now, not because he didn't want to go, he did, but because something had shifted inside Samuel after that last letter. He felt steadier, not healed, not entirely. That word never really applied to a person like him. Too much scar tissue, too many rooms locked from the inside, but clearer, like fog lifting from the surface of a harbour just enough to see the horizon. For the first time in years, Samuel started fixing the things he used to let fall apart. He repaired the broken latch on the shed out back. painted the porch rail Clara had always meant to repaint, and when he caught his own reflection in the window one morning, the faintest smile playing at the corners of his mouth, he realized the house wasn't quieter because she was gone. It was quieter because he wasn't drowning anymore. He still walked into town most days, passing boarded storefronts and wind-warped signs. The diner had finally closed. Even the gas station had stopped stocking newspapers. What was left of the town clung on like old handwriting on parchment, faded but stubborn. At the cafe, now run by a teenager too busy for conversation, Samuel began ordering something other than black coffee and dry toast. Scones, cinnamon rolls, once even a breakfast sandwich. Each time, he half expected Jim's voice in his ear. Finally you're eating like someone with taste buds. But the post office that he saved. He returned a week later. No rain this time, no mist. Just the strange clarity of a still afternoon, the kind where sound seemed to hold its breath. The bell above the door didn't ring. The woman behind the counter was already waiting, her eyes bright, though her smile seemed softer than before, calmer, as if she too knew what this visit meant. A single envelope sat on the counter, light blue, smaller than the others. His heart stuttered when he saw the handwriting. To my son. He reached out and touched the paper with reverence, like it might vanish if he blinked. It was his mother's. She died in 1983. Quietly, after a winter illness took more than her breath. They hadn't spoken the night before she passed. He'd been busy with work, stuck on base, thinking there'd be more time. He took the letter to the bench against the far wall, the one by the heater that only worked half the time. The room smelled faintly of dried roses and ink. He opened the flap carefully, slid out the letter. Sammy, I never knew how to say things out loud, not the big things. You remember, I was better with pies than with apologies. I was hard on you sometimes. You were so quiet as a child, and I mistook that for softness. I didn't know how to raise a boy without armour, but you grew into a man with kindness, with a strength that didn't need to shout to be known. I saw that. I hope you know I saw that. I've missed you every day. Not just since I left, but even before. When I was too tired or too stubborn to say the words, so I'll say them now. I'm proud of you. I love you. Mum Samuel didn't cry. Not right away. He folded the letter carefully, holding it like a blessing. Then he leaned back against the wooden panelling and closed his eyes, letting the silence settle around him. His mother. He hadn't expected that, hadn't even considered it, and now her voice echoed in his mind like a lullaby remembered in the dark. When he returned to the counter, the woman didn't speak. She simply nodded, understanding written in the set of her jaw, the slight press of her hands together. One left? Samuel asked. She turned the ledger toward him again. Beneath his name, letters remaining, Hepton. One. He stared at it for a long moment. His fingers brushed the page, but he didn't ask who the last one was from. Not yet. Some doors are meant to be knocked on only once you're ready to walk through them. Thank you, he said quietly. She inclined her head. We only deliver what's already written. He stepped out into the fading light, the sun turning gold behind the clouds, and for the first time in a very long time, Samuel Emery felt like a man carrying not the weight of memory, but the weight of meaning. He didn't know when he'd return, but he would, because some letters were the end of something, and some were the beginning. The next morning, Samuel stood by his kitchen window, holding his coffee in both hands, watching the gulls fight over nothing. That's how it always started. Just birds and sky and the ocean pretending it wasn't devouring the shore an inch at a time. The town still dozed under a blanket of sea wind and memory. He could feel it pulling at him again, the gentle tug of that place behind the ivy-covered door. But he didn't move. Not yet. He spent the afternoon dusting the mantel, rearranging books he hadn't touched in years, found an old photo album tucked beneath a stack of yellowed National Geographics. He opened it slowly, the plastic pages crackling, the images inside dim with age. There she was, Clara, sitting on a park bench, cheeks round with laughter, their young daughter Maggie asleep on her lap. The sunlight had found her then, just as it always seemed to, like it knew she needed it more than most. He ran a finger down the edge of the photo, feeling the ghost of her warmth, and for a moment he wondered, was the last letter from her? Would she speak to him again? Would she forgive him? Samuel wasn't sure he could take another message from the dead, not from her, because she was the one he owed the most and had given the least to in return. At least, that's how it felt in the years since she passed. She had loved him with patience, with tea at midnight when his bones ached from work, with a voice like water smoothing stone, and he had grieved her too quietly, with silence and routine and unfinished conversations. He left the album open on the table and went to the porch. The breeze had shifted, saltier today, sharper. He walked, down the gravel lane, past the fence missing 2 slats, past the house with the sun-faded flag and the rusted swing set. Every step took him closer to the edge of something he wasn't sure he wanted to see. But he went anyway, and when he turned the final corner and saw the post office, it wasn't there. Only wind and grass and a sagging bench where the building should have been. The lot was empty. Not abandoned. Empty. As if nothing had ever stood there at all. Samuel blinked, stepped forward. Nothing but earth. No ivy, no bell, no door with chipped red paint, no sign. He turned slowly, trying to make sense of it. Had he walked the wrong path? Taken a different turn? But no, this was it. This was where it had always been. And now, it wasn't. He stood there for a long time, staring at the absence. Something hollow pressed against his ribs. Panic, almost. A kind of loss he didn't have words for. "Come back," he whispered. "Please." The wind carried nothing back but the sea's sigh. Then a sound. Behind him, a whisper of movement, not quite footsteps, not quite wind. He turned. The building was back, whole, still, standing like it had never left. Samuel exhaled hard, hand on his chest. It hadn't been a trick of memory. It had vanished, and now it had returned, just as silently. He stepped through the door, the same warmth, the same faint smell of ink and dust and lavender oil. And behind the counter the woman waited, her eyes on him like she'd been expecting the hesitation. "Some letters wait until the heart's ready," she said, as if offering him the final line of a riddle. He didn't speak. He couldn't. She reached beneath the counter and laid the last envelope on the wood between them. Pale yellow, the ink darker this time, a deeper blue, his name written with care, and one word below it, "Goodbye." Samuel stared. He didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Clara. He took it in his hands, lighter than he expected, and sat on the same bench he'd sat on every time. The heater rattled once and then fell silent. He opened the letter. My Samuel, if you're reading this, you've made it. I don't mean to this place, though I know how far it must have felt. I mean here, to the quiet after the storm, the moment when grief softens just enough for love to speak through it again. I don't want you to carry guilt, not for the things unsaid, or the nights you pulled away instead of closer. Love is not always loud. Sometimes it's found in old coffee cups, and the way you always made sure my side of the bed was warm before I climbed in. I've been with you. Every morning you didn't think you could stand, every memory that returned uninvited, every ache you blamed on the rain but knew was really loneliness. I forgive you, and I love you, but you have more road to walk, more mornings to feel sunlight on your shoulders. Let me go, my love. Let me rest in the spaces between your memories, not the weight around your ankles. Live now, for both of us. Always yours, Clara. Samuel's hands trembled, not with sorrow, with something gentler, relief, the kind that arrives after decades of carrying something too heavy to name. He folded the letter with care, placed it in his coat pocket, and looked toward the door. The woman behind the counter was no longer there. Only silence now, only peace. And when he stepped outside, the building didn't vanish, but Samuel didn't look back. He walked home with his chin high, the final letter close to his heart, and for the first time since Clara's passing, he didn't feel alone. Not in the way that hollows you, not in the way that waits. He felt free, and somewhere, in the space between goodbye and forever, a love like that never ends. It simply waits to be remembered, and chooses finally to be let go.